Today we're going to talk about mens rea, which is an important concept in criminal law. Really, mens rea is one of these Latin words that pops up in law, and you say, well, why do we always have to throw Latin in there? Really, all it means is the guilty mind. Mens, like mental, rea is guilty, so the guilty mind. And really, all it is it's one of two components alongside showing the action that you did that a prosecution has to show in a criminal case in order to have you found guilty. Now, this is what we're going to look at today, depending on the type of crime you're accused of, the actual mens rea that has to be proven will change. It might be something that's very specific. It might be something very vague that's almost close to just not really caring about what happened. The whole idea of mens rea being important is that this is what differentiates criminal cases from civil cases. Like if you're just being sued for something, it's often just for carelessly causing an accident and not taking reasonable care to prevent a bad thing from happening. And it doesn't actually matter if you wanted something to happen or not in a civil case when you're being sued. But in a criminal case, it's the opposite. It really does matter what you wanted to have happen because we're punishing your immorality. Now, we'll see there are kind of exceptions to this that we'll get to today. But this is the big difference between being sued, where being sued doesn't matter what you wanted to happen, it just matters whether or not it happened, whether or not you should be held responsible. In criminal cases, we want to know what was it that you wanted to happen. If you did an action, but you didn't actually want the consequences of it to happen, then you're probably not going to be found criminally guilty. Okay, now you might assume that there'd be a bunch of, there'd really only be one way for you to have a guilty mind, but there are actually a bunch. And we'll look at them in turn. The most common one, the one you tend to think of, and this is actually the default that shows up in most criminal cases, is what we'd call willfulness. That's really just wanting it to happen. Willful blindness is kind of a thing that when you're a little kid you try, and that's where you pretend like you don't know that you're doing a crime. We'll see that that actually doesn't work. There's also recklessness and criminal negligence, which these are actually two distinct concepts in the criminal law, but they're so similar to each other that we can just treat them as one for the purposes of our course. We'll also look at strict liability and absolute liability. Okay, we'll also in a future class look at situations where the law says, well, maybe even if it looks like there was a guilty mind here, where it looks like there's mens rea, we're actually going to say that there isn't. We'll look at cases of automatism, that you think of that as sleepwalking, or also where somebody is declared to be not criminally responsible to a mental disturbance, which you would colloquially just think of as the insanity defense. And finally, the concept of mistaken belief, which we will look at in a later class.